always feel like when it says recording in progress, I have to not say anything at first, make sure that everyone's okay. But then I have a hard time doing that. How's everyone doing tonight?
Okay, good.
Good. So, I like the fact that we had some topics to think about before we had the meeting tonight. Oh, that was a nice touch. Which means everyone thought about all those topics, right? I'm sure, Chris, you were.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good. So, Chris, when are you coming out next?
Probably in a couple weeks here. I think when we start getting into the more formal adoption, I'll be out quite a bit probably.
Okay. Do we have anything scheduled for that timeline at all, or will you just be out here with Brian and the rest of the team?
I think a little of both. I'm not quite sure. I don't have it off the top of my head, but June and July will be pretty hectic, I think.
Great, when everyone's taking vacations and things.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that was one of the points is we're prepared to speed up and slow down as necessary, like always on this. So yeah.
Yep.
We'll give everybody another minute or two to kind of come get in, and then we'll get started.
That's right.
Ryan, this is Nancy. I'm going to make you the host. If you could watch to bring other folks in, and there's no public at the moment. So, and everyone have a good evening.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you, Nancy.
Gotta pass that one off quickly to you, Brian. I don't know if I've seen her do that before.
She wants to go watch the Nuggets game.
Yeah, who decided this time? Come on. We got a half hour here. Let's go, Chris.
It's okay. I'm taping it. It's fine. I'm good.
So we shouldn't give live updates as we're going?
I can leave it on mute in the background and tell you, but you wouldn't want that, especially if you're taping it.
I thought you said you were taping it.
I am taping it.
Okay.
But you might be taping it too, and I would spoil the, spoil it for you.
To be perfectly honest, I think my ideal for any NBA, NFL is to record it and start about an hour late. So you fast forward through all the commercials, through halftime, and then just catch up 5 minutes before the end.
Colin, I do that all the time, especially in games that I think we're going to lose. It's like, yeah.
That's not the spirit, Michelle.
It's all right. Hey, thank you, Dad. I have 2 Broncos tickets. I go every time, except for preseason. I don't go to preseason. So
good for you for keeping them.
Yeah, well, it's a problem. They get more and more expensive, but what are you going to do? If you give them up, you'll never get them back again. So you just have to either sell them season by season or just keep going. So anyway, looks like lots of people are coming, so I'll shut up.
I feel like we've wasted enough time here. Okay. Important things though.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. It looks like we have one member of the public present. Jan, it looks like you have your hand up. Let me pull you in for public forum, and you will have 3 minutes in just a moment. Get a timer going.
So is this my time? You said in a moment, is this
Yeah,
time?
let me start the clock and go.
Okay. So I'm walking out of the Littleton or Inglewood Library because I didn't know when I needed to put my time in. So here's, I can't talk. I'm sorry. Okay, let me get outside where you can hear me.
And I can stop the time if you want to
Hold on.
get to where you can talk and I can start it back.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry. Can you hear me or do I need to get in my car?
We can hear you.
Okay. So what I want to say is I've been trying to get to this meeting. I'm on here. My name is Jan Weipert. I live off Federal and Bellevue. I've lived in Inglewood virtually my whole life. I'm 70. So probably a minimum of 60 of those years I've lived here. And I hate what is happening to our city with the increased density. We're the densest city of its size and population in the state of Colorado. And we're up there in density for the UF. So please be aware of that as you're deciding to add units. We don't have to have the whole world live in our city. It's okay for them to live somewhere else. It's important you hear that. When you're looking at adding ADUs, I know a lot of people are very wanting to do this, the romance of having a mother-in-law in their backyard. But there's a difference between a mother-in-law and a developer coming in and taking a lot and adding 2 units and then putting non-owner occupied people into those spaces. That is just outrageous, you guys, for our city. We don't need more on non-owner people. Honestly, we have more non-owner people living in Inglewood right now than owners. And what happens then? Who takes care of the property when they aren't owners? You have more problems with code enforcement, more crime, more, already density. And I care about people. I don't dislike people, but you have to think about these things. Please, please, please think about them. I'm passionate about helping people, but I'm also passionate about the number one is taking care of our residents, which are owners and current residents. Number 2 are businesses that have businesses here. And then number 3 come the developers way down the list. We don't have to take care of them. We worry about them, we care about what they're doing, but they aren't our priority. Those developers are not our priority. That's what I've got tonight. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, we don't have any other members of the public present. So we will get into our discussion items. I believe we sent out the 4 questions that council had discussed last week at their meeting. And I apologize, my presentation won't look nearly as good as the ones that Chris does. It's pretty bland, but just has the questions and a few notes that we were asked to bring some additional information to you all. So let me share my screen real quick and we'll get started on these items.
Brian, will we have a chance to ask any questions of staff just to kind of follow up on a couple items that Jan had mentioned that I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly also?
We generally don't answer questions from public comment. It's
No,
time
that
for them to speak, but we don't necessarily provide responses.
No,
But
I
if
have
you
a
have
couple
questions that are built off of that, we can try to answer them as much as we can.
Yeah, and I think they're more open-ended, maybe open-ended ones
Sure.
that we can get information for, and we can ask those at a later time or not, whatever works best for you.
Yeah, let's go through the presentation first, if y'all want to do that, or if you'd rather ask questions first.
Nope.
I'm free either way.
I got it written down. I'm good to wait.
Okay. Okay, so here are the 4 questions in pretty short order that we've been asked to tackle this week. So the first would be, what is the minimum lot size to be eligible for 2 ADUs? As you know, that's kind of been a discussion topic, is this the internal and external ADU requirement. I think it started out at 7,200 square foot and then was reduced at one point to 6,000 square foot. And then there were some questions, discussion between some council members, which one's the appropriate number. Should size requirements for internal ADUs and external ADUs be the same? Should we require parking or not require parking for ADUs? And then should there be a reduction in bulk plane back to 15 feet for R2A and or R2D zone districts? So we have a little additional information that we tried to put together. These are really some notes, especially following the ADUs. I hope you're able to see all this, but what we tried to do was put together some information about what's allowed in other cities across the Denver metro area, as far as number of ADUs allowed. If there is more than one allowed, which there's no city that currently allows more than one, what would the lot size requirement be? Do they allow both internal and external, which most cities appear to allow both except for Aurora? If they do allow both, what is the size requirement difference between internal and external? So some cities do the same thing. Some cities allow an internal ADU to be the square footage of the first floor. So it's a kind of a vast array of different requirements from city to city. The easiest one to tackle is most of the cities do require one off-street parking space. There's 2 cities that don't. And then the city, I believe it's Sheridan or Littleton, sorry, allows some reductions in the parking. So they require one off-street parking space unless you live in certain areas, like 1/4 mile of a public transit station, inside one of their historic districts or in a mixed-use development. So I think we can start with the first question, and we can just go around the horn on the allowance of the additional unit, whether the lot size requirement should be 6,000 square feet or 7,200 square feet. And we can have some discussion, and if y'all want, we can take kind of a poll. We got some responses emailed in by Suzanne for her responses. She's not available to make the meeting tonight, but she did send her responses into those 4 questions. So I think that's probably the easiest way to go. So start with some discussion and then take kind of a straw poll of which way we want to go. So we'll start with Kate.
Thanks. I was just wondering, when you collected this information, did you happen to see how many ADUs they've actually been able to build with how they've set it up in these different communities? And then also, do we have data on how, like, the amount of 6,000 square foot lots versus 7,200 square foot lots in or above?
I don't have information on how many had been constructed. I do know that just trying to gather this information in the last 2 days, Boulder has redone their requirements. They're not on this list, but they have redone their requirements. They've adopted them. They're not in place yet. I think they go into effect later this month or next month. The city of Denver is rewriting theirs, or they're taking kind of doing a study to look at theirs. And the city of Centennial is redoing their code addressed to ADUs. And if I can recall from one of their presentations, their discussion topics is that, you know, ADUs weren't constructed at the rate that they thought they were going to be when they wrote the regulations originally. And whether that's a regulatory issue or just a construction cost issue, we don't know. But no, I do not have those numbers on the number of units that were built. Some cities, it's harder to track than others on how many have been constructed. And I think we had, if you can pull this presentation away, I might be able to get some of those numbers from a previous presentation on the 6,000 to 7,200 square foot lot, or maybe Chris might have those numbers. I know we had them in a previous presentation for a council study session. Brenda?
Right, right. Well, I don't really have any questions. I'm just gonna weigh in
Okay.
unless somebody else has a question. Do you want me to, can I weigh in on my thoughts about this?
Yeah, and I have another slide for the lot size. If y'all want to
Oh,
see
for
that
the
one as
lot size
well.
discussion? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because I did, that's kind of what I wanted to discuss.
So what we did here was looked at I picked 3 random lots throughout the city and tried to put them down to show you what some of these lots look like based on the structures that are on there in their driveways, any of the items that might count towards lot coverage. Just to kind of show the complexity of how some of this might work if somebody was looking at doing, 2 ADUs on a 6,000 square foot lot or a 7,200 square foot lot, or kind of up to our 10,000 square foot lots. And I can go back and forth between these if y'all want to. We also looked
Well,
at, oh,
there
go
we
ahead.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So this
that's
one,
the picture
so this
that I
one,
wanted.
what we did was we found 3 random blocks throughout the city. The one on the far left, they average around 6,000 square foot per lot. The one in the middle is closer to 7,200 on the northern part. As you can see on the southern few lots, the lots get a little bit bigger, but that's the closest that we could find that gets to about 7,200 square feet on all of them. And the one on the far right is about 10,000 square foot per lot. If you do the math on the average block width or block length of 600 square foot, I did the math on all these earlier. The 10,000 square foot lots, you get about, I think the number is about 16 total lots on that entire block. I think on the 7,200 square feet, you'd get about 20 lots per block. And then I think on the 6,000 square feet, you'd get, I believe it's about 24 lots per block. So I don't know if that's some of the information that you were looking for, Brenda, or that you wanted to see, but we tried to put together a few different graphics and scenarios.
Yeah, thanks so much. This is excellent. This is exactly what
Okay.
we need to see what this looks like practically. So great job. So I'm just going to tell you that I want to find a compromise area for city council because I think that's where they're leading, and for the people. Now, I think a lot of people would, first of all, there's a lot of people who don't want any ADUs. That's not going to work. And then, but the second ADU, I think somebody like Jim Woodward and some of our longtime residents would prefer 10,000 feet. But I think we could compromise with 7,200 feet lots in the middle there in R1. And I would be willing to, another compromise area is don't make mandatory parking. And I have a market argument for that, Carl, which I'll go on about later, about why we don't need a parking requirement. But I would like to see this group go with 7,200 as a middle area to make everybody happy. No one will be happy, but just kind of, if you look at the 6,000 area on the right, that's like it's all of R1. So that's just, it's a silly minimum because that's all the lots. I'm done.
Okay. Colin?
Yeah, I guess can you go back to the previous slide?
Yeah.
And make sure I'm understanding. I'm sorry, one more back with the other cities. So they've all specifically not allowed 2 ADUs, or are you saying that the ones who are redoing theirs, Boulder, Denver, I forget what the other one was, or Centennial, are they currently adding 2 ADUs?
I don't know that any of the cities that are updating their regulations right now are adding the allowance for a second ADU.
Okay.
So,
and just to make sure I'm still understanding this, these are saying you can have, except for Aurora, can have one or the other.
that was my understanding.
Okay.
I didn't speak to anybody on any of these staffs. I just went through code, tried to find out their rules and regulations, and what I could find, to me, pointed out to just one allowance of 1 per lot.
Good. That is interesting. I was trying to visualize when it would make sense to have the 2. The discussion of having the basement unit started to make more sense to me. I understand it now. I think it would probably be a hard sell to say 2. Chris, I guess, did you recommend the 2? How did we get to 2 ADUs, or was that a council request?
I believe it was a council request. We have seen cities do 2. I don't have a good pulse of how many, but usually when they do, it's a lot size requirement, or the other thing, the 2 things I want to keep in mind about all of this, and which would help us get to the right number, is the first part of these, the A and the ADUs, is we need to make sure that they're truly accessory. So I think a lot of the concerns we hear is like us turning these into duplexes and things like that. And so we need to make sure that that does not happen. And so the jurisdictions that do allow 2 are usually, if it's either an attached detached requirement, or it's essentially splitting the yield. Basically, it's not like you get more. It's usually, well, you can take your allocation and make 2 units out of it rather than 1. So that's usually where the cities that consider multiple fall. There is one city that jumps to my mind only because we worked with someone on it that does allow multiple, and it's Atlanta. I don't have the specifics of that, but it's I wouldn't say it's common, but it's a trend.
Right. And then that actually triggered by one of my questions. I throw it out. Are there ownership requirements for an ADU at all, or is any of that in there?
So right now there are. Inglewood has the provision that at least one of the units needs to be occupied by someone who owns greater than 50% of the overall property.
And will that continue to be in the new?
So there was direction and discussion to eliminate that, or possibly allow it to sunset. The reason to do that is trying not to unfairly disadvantage people that rent property is the reason for getting rid of it. And also sometimes it's viewed as an impediment to it. The discussion at the council to sunset it came from one of the comments we heard earlier in the public comments of we want this to be a benefit to property owners and homeowners to have an added opportunity. We don't want this to be an impetus for redevelopment or outside development. And that's a little bit hard to gauge when we're setting up rules that should apply equally. Sometimes we lose some of that nuance, but at least the idea of sunsetting the owner occupancy came from that provision, that someone would have to live there that owns the property for a period of time, and then maybe eventually it could go away once it, the market had kind of settled down on that. So it wasn't purely for speculation or opportunistic developers. But there's kind of pros and cons of each side. The reason for getting rid of the owner occupancy is sometimes that can be an impediment to what we're trying to achieve, which is more attainable housing options, or limiting the properties that are most likely to provide an ADU. Sometimes those are homes that are rentals, and they can be diversified a little bit. The other aspect is trying to make sure it's truly for residents and neighborhood stakeholders.
Yeah, I would think I want to hear everyone else before I fully weigh in, but appreciate that information. Thanks.
Noel?
On the topic of multiple ADUs, I feel that, at least in the 6,000 square foot lots, you'd be building some pretty small ADUs to fit under the lot coverage. It seems to be a bit of a lightning rod, I remember actually back to earlier sessions where I had to ask the question of, what would this look like? So I don't really see a need to really push on that one if there's not really a strong vision of why we want to do that. And yeah, I'm in favor of sunsetting the owner requirement. Not getting rid of it entirely, but I wouldn't want to see these, a big boom on snapping up properties just to develop both, or to build and then sell and have it rented out by, likely an industrial renter.
No, I might have missed it. What was your thought on the size requirement?
The lot size?
Yeah.
Well, I say why bother with 2 ADUs unless there's a really compelling
Oh, okay.
reason? And I haven't really heard a compelling reason for doing more than one, but it seems like a big talking point, which, as I mentioned, I had the same questions a lot of people are asking initially.
Okay. Carl?
The two pictures of the blocks, there's no alleys on the middle and the right one. Is it required to have a entrance to a ADU from an alley?
No, so the current requirements don't, they don't require ADUs, or they don't restrict ADUs from non-alley loaded lots. But they do have a requirement that the parking must be located at the rear 35% of the lot. So when you look at a lot of these structures, a lot of them are built in a manner where you wouldn't be able to gain vehicular access to the rear of the lot.
Right.
So that one provision can kind of eat up some people's abilities to put an ADU on a non-alley loaded lot. I don't believe that has been put in the current regs, Chris, or in the proposed regulations, but it's not in the existing ones.
Yeah, and it's not in our current draft. With regard to the entrance, however, that is one of the things that is a good signal for making sure the unit is accessory. So while not requiring it to be accessed off the alley to where it's very remote, there is a requirement that it needs to be discrete and internalized to the lot itself. So if it's a detached building in the rear, much easier done. For the ones that are being considered attached, they would have to do things that clearly make that a subordinate entrance or an unseen entrance if it were an attached unit.
So I got a question on the what is an ADU? I mean, not what I'm looking at is internal ADU. Could you just take and rent out the basement as for a roommate, basically, technically called a roommate? And does it have to be an ADU, or what is the difference between an ADU rental and a roommate rental?
Yeah, I think you answered it well last meeting, Brian, but I'll take a stab at it from our perspective. Essentially, it becomes another unit when it's separated. In other words, it can be locked, secured, separate entrance, and it has its own kitchen and sanitary facilities. So kitchen, bathroom, sleeping facilities. Then it becomes a second unit and can be treated separately, and that's what makes it accessory. And there's essentially 2 households there rather than one. The situation you're describing of renting out your home, that's more a factor of how the city defines household, and that can always happen. A household doesn't have to be just the family member; it can be multiple different parties. I think your current definition has it at up to 3 unrelated, and so that they're all sharing the principal unit, and that's not considered an accessory dwelling unit. That's just a household living in an existing unit.
Okay. As far as your chart there, I kind of go along with most of the municipalities that you can have both, but only an internal or external. And the square footage, I would go for 7,200 feet with a 1 parking spot.
Okay. Andy?
Yeah, I had some thoughts to share on some of these. I really think the internal ADUs are going to open up some great new possibilities in terms of more feasible ADU, just because you're not necessarily building a whole new structure. So I'd hate to make that harder in some of these situations. I do understand that maybe if people are having to choose between adding an external or internal, like maybe that's fair, but I do think that lot coverage and it being accessory to the primary structure and size could really govern this without needing to have just a number that has to apply to all lots. I think the lot coverage, because we already allow garages that are up to 1,000 square feet, and yet we have ADUs that the requirement, the size max is much lower. On the owner occupancy requirement, I'll just add that financing can be a big issue if you have an owner occupancy requirement, because the bank doesn't want to finance the construction of an ADU if there's an owner occupancy requirement, because if they have to take over that property, they're not going to move in. So it can be a big barrier, that occupancy requirement. It might sound reasonable, but it's not going to help units get constructed if that's our goal. And then what I've noticed with the parking requirements, they're often at odds with, even for those that have alley access, to be on the rear portion of the lot that is required currently, and I think is still in this draft. That can really be at odds with having a separate parking space accessed from the rear, where they're kind of both conflicting with each other. And I think I've seen cases like that, at least at the Board of Appeals and Adjustment, on trying to struggle with that.
Okay. Brenda?
Okay, now I'll add my 2 cents about parking requirement. I think we can forego it, and the reason why is because it can be realistically contained in our market. For instance, if your goal is to rent it out, you're going to get more money for your rental if you can create a parking space on site. If you're going to create an extra structure for a short-term rental, you're going to get better reviews if they don't have to walk far, if they don't have to park far, if there's a place to park. And finally, if you're just trying to put in a relative, a disabled or elderly person, you're not going to need a parking space, and that could really hamper you in just trying to take care of an elderly relative. So that was my thought about not requiring a parking space is where I think I'm headed on this.
Okay. Noel?
More of a general question, but that helps with the next step. Where is street parking a problem other than near the new PUD developments that have happened recently? And that's not a rhetorical question. I really want to know, where is parking on the street a problem? I can only speak to where I walk and drive, which is only a small piece of Englewood, where it doesn't seem to be. But yeah, I'm curious what parking looks like across the rest of the city.
It's kind of a tough question for us to answer. We have our own separate parking division. Where we hear of issues occurring are generally around when somebody is running a business out of their home that they shouldn't be, and then that results in a lot of vehicles on the street. Then we get called, and so that's the times that we generally, or at least in my experience, when I hear about issues with parking, that's generally what it's surrounding, is somebody operating a business out of their home that they shouldn't be. Aside from that, I don't personally hear that many issues with parking, except for whenever there's a discussion around a new multifamily project. So same areas as you do, Brooke. I don't know if you hear anything that I don't hear, but those are the times that I hear it.
Yeah, this is Brooke. Yeah, we do have some areas in the city that have restricted parking, sort of for residents only, where they get a sticker, they apply for parking restrictions that allow residents only. And they have to have, I think, something like 75% of the block vote for that. But to my knowledge, they're very few and far between. There have been some north of the hospital or in the hospital area. There have been some sort of adjacent or is, let's say, 1 block in from Broadway. And I'm sure there's others that I'm not remembering, but by and large, most of the city does not have any of those kind of restrictions. And I'm not aware of a ton of parking problems in those areas. It's kind of adjacency to Broadway, perhaps the light rail station, and the medical centers at Craig and Swedish. Other than that, I'm not aware of many.
I'd hate to have the conversation about whether we need an off-street space or not to be dragged out by, street parking is a problem if it's not a problem. And I do leave 1 block up from the Swedish permit area, and it's very effective. I will definitely say.
Carl?
I know of a couple places where I think it's either vehicle collectors where they collect old vehicles, or possibly a business run out of the house. But as you get away from the multifamily units, and I think it's pretty much open, really. I live across from a park, and Saturdays when soccer's going on, you can't park within a half a block of my house. So that's an issue there, but it's not a big deal. But I think most of the multifamily dwellings are basically the issue. One thing that I'd like to, the ADUs in Inglewood, a lot of people talk like everybody in the city is gonna be building 1 or 2 ADUs as soon as everything's approved. I don't see that. It took 5 years for the ADU regulations to become effective. And my understanding is a handful of ADUs were built in the 2 or 3 years after they were approved. So if you make it easier for them to build ADUs and cheaper, maybe there would be a run on ADUs, but I don't see that happening. I don't really, hopefully that won't happen, but maybe there should be some kind of regulation to keep that from happening. I don't think it's going to happen, though. Okay.
Yeah, I've got some numbers on the ADUs that have been approved, and I think it's about 10. So there's 10 either constructed or under construction. Yeah, well, we're really low double digits, 10, maybe 11.
And that's in the last, what, 5 years, 4 or 5 years?
Since the ADU requirements have been approved. We do have a number of non-conforming ADUs that have been in existence for a number of years. I don't have the numbers on that, but yeah, once the new requirements came in, we're very limited in how many are actually under construction or built.
Okay, yeah, that's not a real problem. So,
Michelle?
Before I make any comments, and it wasn't included on those questions, but City Council say that they wanted to allow ADUs in all districts, or is it not all districts? I know it's like all, but I don't know. I'm unclear on R1s.
I believe it's all the residential districts. I don't have the use table pulled up, Chris.
Okay.
And then all the way through MUR.
Yeah, to everything basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the discussion
Everything
at
that
the
has
council
residential.
was to allow them, essentially the move would be to allow them in R1A and B now rather than just R1C.
Okay.
And
Okay.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I'm happy to weigh in on this. I think that it's very telling that all of these cities allow one, either or, is, I think, appropriate, and basically all of them require an off-street space. And I think that is critical. I don't think, like Carl, I don't think we're going to have a vast number of ADUs springing up no matter what we do. But I would like to suggest that there are numerous ADUs that you don't know about, including 2 on my street. They just basically built something above their house, and it'll be a problem when they try to sell their house. But you know, if people don't want to pull a permit and build something, that's what they're just going to go ahead and do. So, but I think the off-street space is really critical because, yeah, we want these ADUs to be a benefit to the people who really need them and want them. But by the same token, we want to make sure that they're friendly to the neighborhood. And I look at the off-street space as so that whoever's living in it, they basically are not going in and out the front door all the time, which everybody, I don't know about you guys, but I can hear people shutting their car doors on my street across the street, and things like that. So I think it's to be kinder to the neighborhood as well as providing for a parking spot. I will tell you that in my neighborhood, I never had a parking problem until the last 4 or 5 years. When my neighbor across the street, the 2 teenagers grew up. One of them has a family, so now there's 2 families over there with kids, and one's an artist, and so she has a van to haul stuff around. And then next door, some other family moved in, and they've got people of driver's age, and it's hard to park in front of my house now. So, and it's hard. And at the other end of the block, down on Floyd, we get all of the people that are on Floyd. They get all the parking from Kimberly Woods, because Kimberly Woods, which is a very old apartment complex, but they charge for their parking, and so they're parked up and down that street all along Romans Park. So I don't think we need to make brand new roads for the entire metro area here. I think we should follow what's presented in this table. 1 per lot, can be either or, 1 off-street space. We really don't know what the future will bring. It's hard to see. And I don't think that we need to be the pioneers of perhaps unintended consequences in getting rid of the off-street space dedication. So there's my thoughts.
Okay, Colin?
All right, push the wrong button there. I did have a question about number of lots in each one of these areas, and maybe it doesn't really matter if we're talking about R1A, B, and C. So I'll table that for now. But I think I'm leaning towards the 7,200. I'm not seeing the need for 2 per lot. I'm having a hard time seeing that, but I also don't believe that we need a parking requirement. I think the intent of these is likely that they'll be over a garage or maybe in a basement. But again, if you have to have an off-street parking pad and you don't have that already, it makes it almost impossible to do. So it's almost like saying you can't do it even if you can do it. So my thought would be 7,200. Well, actually, I'm actually going with Noel and saying I don't think we need 2 ADUs, but no street parking for an ADU either, or no additional parking requirement for an ADU.
Okay.
I do
So
have some
Oh,
numbers on the
go ahead, Chris.
lots.
Okay.
Maybe you and I are going to say the same thing, Ryan. I found
Yep.
some data from Ayers on the lots. Now, it's not necessarily the lot sizes, but each zoning district could be a rough proxy for the lot sizes. But essentially R1A, you have 2,254 lots. And those lots, that's the district with the minimum lot size of 9,000 square feet. Again, there's probably could be some that are non-conforming that are lower and some that are quite larger. R1B, you have 502 lots. That's the one that goes down to a 7,200 minimum. So they should be 7,200 or above. And then R1C has 4,385 lots. So by far the larger of that, and that's the one with the 6,000 square foot minimum requirement. Then in R2A, you have 637 lots, and R2B, you have 1,555 lots. And I can maybe get that to a screen where you can see it and revisit it here in a moment.
You
The
may
other,
put in the notes or in some place.
yeah, I'll
I
try
tried to write it down. Thank you.
You're gonna challenge my Zoom technology, but I will definitely, I'm copying it right now to get it pasted in there. The other thing, not to throw a wrinkle into the thinking, because I think the logic is sound on the, like, I think in this committee, the logic came that like, well, even the idea of allowing it in R1A what seemed more likely because the lots were larger and it could more easily accommodate an accessory building or a larger building footprint, I think was part of the thinking, which is true. But there is also some thinking towards the opposite direction, particularly when we look at one of the benefits of keeping as many zoning districts as you have is to make some finer distinctions. So I looked up the Atlanta legislation that I had referred to that we were familiar with and had done a little work on earlier. And one of the things they allow up to 3 units, but only in certain districts. And the only reason I bring that up to you all is because that might be, rather than lot size, that could be a good strategy simply because from our observation, a lot of your R2A and B and even some of your MUR3 districts are actually zoned for something much larger, but have a single family house on it, a detached house. Perhaps allowing multiple units, multiple ADUs in those districts, which are already zoned for multiple unit buildings, could be a strategy to give those homeowners an avenue to not redevelop and maybe find more capacity out of their existing building scale. I don't know that that's completely well thought out, but at least I thought I'd mention that because that seems to be what the path that the Atlanta allowance for multiple ADUs went.
And Kate, to follow up, I don't have the number for 6,000 square foot lots, but for lots, and this will be by zoning districts, lots greater than 7,200 square feet, R1A has 1,867, R1B has 439, and R1C has 1,104. And this is more of that Ayers information.
Can you copy that to the chat or send that again? Because I can't write.
Yeah, I can type it in.
Quickly.
Kate, did you have something?
Yeah, thank you for that information. That helps me get a sense of the quantity out there. Chris, I really like what you just brought up in terms of thinking about this more in terms of where we could potentially have density or to try and maybe prevent additional density by having more flexibility around creating more ADUs. I guess I was initially kind of going along that same path of, I don't know if we need 2 ADUs on a lot. Like, first, let's get some built. Let's allow them in more places. But I do like that idea of maybe focusing in that more on the MUR 3 areas and see if that's possible. I also like Littleton's approach of allowing, but I think it was more around their parking, but making it more focused on where it's near their transit centers and having that be kind of a different limitation. I guess in kind of looking at the 6,000 square foot versus a larger, that seemed like a lot to try and have 3 units on a 6,000 square foot lot, but maybe that would be appropriate in the MUR3 areas. I'd want to look at that a little bit more. And I know we were first tackling just the square footage. So I guess initially in my mind, if we were going with more than one, I would go for the 7,200. And then in my mind, I would not want to have the parking requirement because I think that's just too much of a barrier. Or if anything, have that be a bonus if it's an affordable unit. but yeah, I think that's a big barrier right now. And I think especially in some of the areas where there isn't alley parking now, adding another parking space in the front of a lot on site probably isn't the best use of space either.
No,
I want to be careful we're not trying to solve enforcement problems through the code. Parking, for example, maybe in a neighborhood, you require parking permits and each lot gets a certain number of parking permits instead of each resident or each number of houses or something. But, just a little bit of flexibility there, because if we write something like requiring the parking spot, that's unlikely to change anytime soon, if it turns out no one still builds ADUs. But I feel like there's more nimble ways that we can solve some of the problems that are being presented by members of the community, city council. So yeah, just keeping that in mind, I think, is important.
Brenda?
Well, yeah, I didn't know we were going to revisit MUR3. I mean, I thought we had already kind of decided that, well, nothing was firm, of course, but 2 ADUs were okay for all of those areas, and that this discussion had a lot to do with adding ADUs to a new area, the R1A, whatever. So, I mean, if you want to just scrap 1 RA, that's fine too. We don't have to do 2. The idea was being that one is like the basement is internal, has to be attached, and the other has to be detached. And the way to restrict that within these zones is the lot requirement. But I didn't think, I'm looking at the zone draft. And the draft has different lot requirements. Let me look at this again. Maybe I'm looking in the wrong place. Per zone. So like I thought it was just in R1A, it has to be a minimum lot size. And then as you move down to MR3B and all that, you don't need that minimum lot size. I mean, I thought we had what I'm saying is I already thought we did that. So I thought tonight's discussion was specifically changing R1A and B. But I don't want there to be a lot of unhappy people. So realistically, we should just go to 10,000 feet in R1A or 9,000 is my thought. But I was willing to compromise at 7,200 and forego any debate about the parking requirement.
Thank you. Andy?
Yeah, I was really liking what Chris was bringing up about trying to tie this to each individual zone district, because when we're looking at the criteria on the Board of Adjustment and Appeals, we have some that are related to the intent of the zone district, and we're considering things like oddly shaped lots, and so lot size comes into play in a lot of our work. But if it's clear that this is something that is enjoyed by properties in the zone district, like it's a much harder thing for someone to come in and try and get a variance on. So if we're looking for some middle ground, we could try to vary whether it's the minimum lot size to be eligible for 2D ADUs, or the size requirements, or even some of these things we could try and vary this by zone district, which I think would clear up some stuff when we're hearing variance cases.
Carl?
What was the R1C size of lots, average size?
So the minimum size requirement in that district is 6,000 square foot.
Okay. That's a lot of lots there. I didn't realize it was that big. And I'm kind of thinking that maybe R1C can be internal ADUs and no off-street parking because of the lack of space there anyway. With the smaller lots, just adjust the restrictions. It's basically what I'm saying.
Michelle?
Yes, oops. Okay, good. Just want to make sure I wasn't muted. I think, I don't know where the 2 ADUs per property came from either, and it doesn't really matter. I think what we really need to think about is that in any district, if you're saying yes to 2 ADUs on any piece of property, you're basically telling the neighbors that there's not just going to be one family or one, family unit on that piece of property, but now there's potentially 3. And that's a huge increase in the number of people on any one piece of property in a neighborhood, in a single family neighborhood. So I don't think there's any reason for us to consider 2 ADUs on any property. And on those smaller lots, if you do allow 2, it's going to take up the bulk of the lot. And I don't know, with the minimum landscaping requirements, there's not going to be much there except for rooftops. But anyway, I just think that the 2 ADUs is way too far-fetched for where we need to go now.
Colin?
I think we've started talking about a lot of things. I guess we probably need to get routed back to the original question. Are we going to try to vote on this, or how do you want to get this information, Brian, or are you getting the information that you need?
That's my plan. I was going to go through and let everybody speak their piece at whatever they wanted. And then I was just going to ask the 4 questions over again and take votes for if you want to vote for 6,000, 7,200 or not at all. I mean, that's kind of where I'm going. It's, we're kind of opening up a lot of issues that we weren't asked to open up.
Mhm.
We were really just given direction on 4 specific questions.
Right.
And that's kind of where I'm at. I wanted to give everybody the chance to talk about it, but I'm really just tasked with getting 4 questions answered. So if y'all are ready to go answer those questions, I can ask them, or if y'all want to keep the conversation going around some of these items, we're more than welcome to. But that's kind of my limitation on those 4 questions that were sent back.
I think we haven't really talked about the 4th question. I feel like we've talked a lot about the 3rd question, about the first 3 questions. Does anybody else have?
Yeah, we can tackle a bulk plane question last. That one I didn't have a whole lot of material on. It's hard to get pictures of buildings out there with specific bulk planes without us going out there and measuring separate things on those lots and having those buildings next to each other. So if y'all want to go through the ADU related questions first, I'm happy to do that. And then we can tackle the bulk plane question kind of last on its own. But if anybody else has any comments on the ADU stuff, feel free. Otherwise, we'll just go down the list and ask the 3 questions.
All right, I've got, so we said minimum lot size, but this is only for R1A, R1B, and R1C, and does not include any of the other zones?
No, it would be for all zones. So any zones that would allow for an ADU, is there a minimum lot size that would allow them to go to 2? So that's kind of the direction we've been given. If there is, council, I think, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the original discussion was 7,200 square feet. Then it got pushed back to 6,000 square feet. And then at the last meeting, there was still some discussion between the second ADU being allowed on 7,200 or 6,000 square feet.
Correct.
Okay, so I'm just going to go down the list of folks as I see them. Michelle, on question 1, minimum lot size requirement for 2 ADUs, 6,000 square feet, 7,200 square feet, or did you have a separate?
Yeah, I don't want 2 ADUs anywhere.
Okay.
Can you flip back to the slide 1?
Yeah,
Yeah, do you want me just to go down my thoughts on those 4 things that are, or 3 things that are on there, not the, or are we just
let
gonna, are you
me-
just gonna ask the same question and go around?
I can ask each question. I'll do the first 3 questions individually, so I'll just ask each person all 3 questions. Let me just write my notes really quick.
Well, if you want to call on somebody else first, that's fine too. I just,
No.
okay.
And I can, okay.
Just let me know when you want me to start up again.
Go ahead. I've got question 1.
Okay, well, all of my comments are going to be from the perspective is I'm trying to allow people their property rights, but I also want to keep in mind what's the best thing to keep the neighborhood character and that sort of thing. So that's,
Okay.
I just want to give you preface to why, that's why I'm saying this. So I don't want 2 ADUs anywhere. The size requirements for internal or external ADUs, I think the thing that makes the most sense, since we're talking about, Englewood, it's not like a spec home sort of district out in Highlands Ranch. There's lots of variety in our housing. I think the smartest way to address that would be to, as a percentage of the primary residence. Obviously, an internal is obviously got to be smaller than that. Although they could build it on the back, I suppose. Third question is, no, I definitely want to have parking. The vast majority of the metropolitan area is requiring parking. And I think that's a nod to the current residents that yes, we are going to allow things that increase density, although at mild, and we don't want to increase the impact on the neighborhood. So we're going to require a parking space so it doesn't impact you or your neighbor's parking.
Okay. Carl.
No for 2 ADUs. I don't know where that came from or how that got in there, but that's really not feasible in my mind. And 7,200 square feet. For the internal or external ADUs, I don't really see why we should have a regulation on where it should be. I feel like I'm missing something here.
So the second question is essentially based on, the question was, or at least the council discussion was, if external ADUs are limited to 800 square feet and someone wanted to convert a 1,300 square foot basement, how would we regulate them converting only 800 square feet of that basement? So that's where the question came up. Should the size requirement for internal ADUs be the same as external? And like I showed in that chart, and I can show you again, some cities have kept it the same. Other cities have allowed essentially basement units to get a separate kind of carve out that say the basement can be as big as whatever the first floor unit is, to allow for, I think people to not try to add rooms after we go do inspections to these units. So that's kind of where that second question came from. It's not necessarily limiting them to a choice of only doing the internal or the external, but if they do an internal, it gets a separate requirement or gets the same size requirement as an external ADU.
Yeah, for an internal, it should be smaller than the house size. And external, I would go for like 700 square feet, 700 to 800 square feet. Parking, like I said a little bit ago, I think R1A and B can have a required parking space, and R1C is no parking requirement on that. And also the A1C should be internal only.
Okay. Colin.
All right, I'm flopping a little bit because I thought this was only for the R1s. I think we should still be able to have 2 ADUs. I'm gonna go 7,200 square feet. I think the size of the internal ADU should be up to the same as the first floor. I think like the last one, I think was at Lewis or Longmont, or not Longmont. I don't know who the last one was. Wheat Ridge. I like that basement or second story may not exceed the first floor area. I think that makes sense. So that's what I would say for that one. And then parking, I don't think parking should be required for the ADUs.
Okay. Noel.
Don't allow 2 ADUs in the R1 districts. Look separately at the other zones. Different size requirements for attached versus detached. They're just very different scenarios. And no parking requirements solve that concern outside of the code.
Okay. See my list here. Kate.
Very similar to what Colin and Noel were just saying. I think I'm not quite seeing the need for the 2 ADUs in the R1s. If I had to choose, I would say 7,200 square feet. I think one of the things just to note that maybe I'm just confused about is on the table 1651, where we have detached houses with accessory units, 2 accessory units in that draft. The MURs are not, it's not noted in there as allowable. So that may be something that we'd want to look at or need to update. Because I'd like to see those included if you were to have 2 ADUs. I like the idea of having the internal ADUs be no bigger than that first floor template of the house. And then the external ADUs be what we have in the current draft language. I think what you said is around 800 square feet. And no parking requirement. I think that's something that has really been a barrier to building these. And yeah, I would rather see them get built and remove some of those barriers within all the different zone districts.
Andy.
I think I'm just going to echo again. The doing 2 ADUs in the R1 seems to be like something that we can agree on, maybe getting rid of. But if we do need to decide on a number, 7,200 makes sense. The size requirements, treating them differently does make a lot of sense. Regulating the size of the externals to try and keep them feel accessory and with the character, but then just the practical difficulties of trying to reach that same size on an internal ADU. I think as long as it's not bigger than 50% of the structure that results if there's going to be additions or whatnot, I think that makes sense. And then no parking for ADUs, I think it's a big barrier, and trying to get things on the rear part of the lot makes it extra complicated if that's our goal.
I was about to call on Brooke, but he's not a voting person. Brenda.
Okay, I'm going to just, and number 1, a second ADU on lots greater than 9,000 square feet with an exception for MUR. And then question number 2, let you write that down. Should the side be internal be the same as no? Is the answer to that. And number 3 is no parking requirement.
Okay. And then we'll go to question 4. We do have the table that we have presented. Chris put this together today, kind of short order that shows, we talked about R1A and R1B getting the 12-foot bulk plane with an 8-foot rear bulk plane. R1C was the standalone district that was designated the 15-foot and 8-foot. R2A, R2B, and the MUR districts were in the 17-foot bulk plane with a 10-foot rear bulk plane category. There was some discussion with council members on whether R2A or R2B or R2A and R2B should move back to the center and be considered with that 15-foot bulk plane. So that is our final question for tonight that we can discuss, or we should discuss on what your thoughts are on moving those back into the middle. If anybody has any comments, let me scroll back to the top of my list here. Colin.
Thank you. The R2s are, I think, what we are considering the denser areas, not even what we are. They are the denser areas. And I think they should be allowed to have the 17 foot, and that the R1C can be 15 foot if that's what we want to put it at, but I think the R2s should be with the MURs.
Okay.
Thank you.
Andy?
I agree. I think that moving the R2s back into 17 makes sense for the types of housing we're trying to encourage in that district. I think there is some fear about the big duplexes that have been built under the existing bulk plane, but I think trying to get rid of other dimensional requirements that we're trying to control for some of that, I think will really help. And I think we just need that to be able to build some of these housing types more feasibly.
So did you say move R2A and 2B back to 17 foot?
Yeah.
Okay. And Carl?
I'm a little confused on this. The R1A and B is 12 foot, and they're the larger lots. Why is the bulk plane lower on the larger lot?
So I may have to call on the bulk plane guru, Brooke. But that's been the pretty standard requirement for the city, I believe. For quite a long time, everything was 12 foot in the majority of our districts. And then at some point we raised certain districts to 17 foot. And I think it was the thought of between this group and staff and our consultant to look at kind of a 3-tiered approach for different districts. Brooke, do you want to chime in on the 12 foot and R1?
Yes. Carl, in the R1A and R1B, the bulk plane has been 12 feet since 2004. That was never changed and remains at 12 feet today. In 2015 or 16 or early 16, the R1C and R2A and B and MUR 3A, B, and C were changed to 17 feet. And the proposal that the question tonight is whether to lower the R1C, R2A, and B down to 15, or only to lower the R1C down to 15 feet. So the discussion tonight isn't really so much, the question from council was not dealing with R1A and B. They're wanting to keep that the same, at least at this point. It's whether to lower the bulk plane in the R1C, R2A, and B and really it's more to separate, do we just lower it in the R1C? Or do we lower it in the R2A and B as well?
Okay. I wanted to make a comment on the dormers. I drove around, looked at maybe 100 houses, and I might have, there was one house that I found that had a dormer that went out to the garage. There wasn't a window, it was just a walkway to the garage. So basically, it looks like what these are for is to create living space on the attic, basically. Creating more density. The patio area there, I mean, that would be a big thing to put out on your house somewhere, maybe in the front of the house or the back of the house. But I don't really see a whole lot of use for those, but I mean, I can see how they would be used. I know somebody that has a house with like 5 of them. So let me just give you my answer to the question here. The R1C, R2A, and B, I believe that should go back to where it was before, the 12-foot. And then the MUR3, A, B, C, can leave it at 17. Because it's a medical district.
Okay, Kate.
A quick question on this, I'm just confused about, for the height. So is this also reducing the height from 32 feet to 30 feet on?
Yes, in all districts, that was the proposal was to reduce the height to 30 feet for all the residential.
Okay. Since that question isn't on the table, I guess in terms of the changing, I would like to see the R2 stay at 17 feet. The R1C, I guess my concern is that having raised it to 17 feet and then now lowering it to 15 would be a restriction and take away people's rights, or at least some of their developable rights. In my mind, I guess maybe they're still able to do everything they can. So at a minimum, I think having the R2s at 17, I could go either way with the R1C. But yeah, R2s 17 feet.
We got Michelle.
Okay, I'm puzzled on my thoughts about this. I've heard from people, but I've not verified it, that, raising it to 17 feet was terrible and, ruined their neighborhood. But I haven't really researched it very much. So at this point, I think I'm just gonna listen and take a pass on my thoughts, so.
Okay. No.
The only complaints I really ever hear are about the size and mass of the new houses being built. But to the specific question being asked, I don't really have an opinion at this point in time, and I don't feel like we're being asked to really blow this question open again.
Okay. Brenda.
I'm looking for some kind of design consistency in each of these neighborhoods. And now I know that we've kind of blown that out of the water with some of the exceptions we've made, but for consistency's sake, I would vote for R1C to go back down to 15 and R2A and B to remain at 17.
Okay. All right. I think, Chris, do you have everything you need?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
Okay, I think we do. I will stop sharing my screen. And I appreciate everybody's input. Sorry, was somebody saying something?
Just,
Okay.
Well, good work.
yeah, thanks, everyone. Don't forget, we got a meeting
Um,
next Tuesday. This would be the only thing.
We do have an upcoming Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, but we do have planned, sorry, I'm trying to get to. A planned community information session or informational meeting for the UDC. It's planned for June 15th. So keep that on your calendars. We'll get more information out to people as it becomes available, but that's kind of our next meeting. And we're looking at getting our adoption process kind of scheduled out and what that looks like. So as we get more information of it, more concrete deadlines, we will reach out to you all in our Planning and Zoning Commission, but I appreciate everybody's work. And we're going to keep going.
Keep plugging along.
All right,
Thank
Brian,
you.
do you have any information on the location for the June 15th meeting?
We are trying to get that solidified. So as we
Okay.
get it, we'll
Okay.
reach out to y'all with more information. The date is the thing that I have solidified right now is June 15th. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
That's a Thursday.
Night.
Thank you.